I purchased a rather ancient piece of technology, something the people of the time used to refer to as a DSLR. We know this thanks to archaeologists deciphering the Rosetta Stone. This particular DSLR went by the moniker 1DS Mark II, and it was in fact unobtainably expensive for common folk such as myself upon its release in 2004. Yes, I'm an old man. I swear the 1980s and 1990s weren't that long ago. It just seems like it. Actually, I'm pretty sure it all just happened yesterday. But why this particular DSLR as opposed to any other old DSLR? Well, it actually started with the desire to buy a 1D Mark II. Very similar name, released the same year, cosmetically identical in fact, but a very different camera, spec-wise. But actually I did start by buying the 1D Mark II. I bought two of them in fact. The first one I had to return due to a broken button. The second one, I don't even know. There was a problem either with the sensor or the autofocus, possibly both. But this is like my bucket list camera, and I may have just maybe waited a touch too long to buy one. So I decided to give the 1DS Mark II a try. My hope was that the images coming out of it would look more like the 1D Mark II and less like its actual predecessor, the 1DS, the original 1DS. I used to own that camera, but the images coming out of it never looked as special to me as the 1D and the 1D Mark II. So the 1D Mark II was the camera that always stuck out in my mind, and I was super interested in revisiting that, see if it held up. I just couldn't get one that worked right. So, I mean, I guess it held up. It's hard to say. It was very frustrating, that whole experience. I mean, the companies I bought from, I applaud their awesome return policy. That was a breeze. I got my money back easily. But maybe if they spent more time testing the cameras first, an awesome return policy wouldn't even be necessary. It just seems like a smarter way of doing business to make sure you're delivering a great product. But whatever, I don't want to shit on a company too hard. That resolved the issue. It's just that it wasted a lot of my time. But now I've got this badass 1DS Mark II, a 17 megapixel camera. The other one was 8 point something, 8.2. How amazing is that there was a 17 megapixel camera in 2004? That kind of blows my mind. It's actually 16 point something, 16.7 I believe. But that's called rounding up. You see, that's how that works. But it's also full frame as opposed to the other one, which was a cropped sensor camera. Not quite as severe a crop as an APS-C. It's an APS-H, which is not super common, but so not a huge crop, but a crop nonetheless. And the crop sensor is not at all a deal breaker for me, but sure, given the choice, I'll take a full frame. Yes, please. I shoot RAW plus JPEG these days with the intention of only ever using the JPEG. The RAW is just there for safety. This camera arrived with a filthy fucking sensor. So in every case I had to open the RAW file and retouch out a million little dust spots. So these all look exactly like the JPEG straight out of camera, but they're not, because if I'm gonna have to do retouching, I'd rather start with something uncompressed. That was a little surprising to me though. You would think that these used camera vendors would be cleaning the sensors before selling the cameras. It didn't happen on the first two I bought. Therefore, I didn't even give it any thought. I just went out and shot this thing without checking or without proactively cleaning it. That was rather disappointing. Glad I didn't take it to a wedding or something. Not that I would. Of course I'm gonna test it first. Besides that though, besides the dust thing, I am honestly gobsmacked with this camera. It didn't just exceed my expectations, it managed to exceed my wildest hopes. It caused me to rethink my whole gear strategy. I could easily slip this camera body in amongst more modern gear. And I'd be confident that no one could tell a difference in image quality, certainly not any kind of decline in image quality. I actually think the images coming out of this camera are really special, even by modern standards. It does have a classic look, but you're getting that classic look delivered to you at a much higher resolution than most other classic DSLRs. I have a handful of EF lenses that I still love, that I don't particularly feel inclined to upgrade. Currently, I adapt those to mirrorless, no longer. Going forward, when I shoot an EF lens, I'm just going to do so on a native EF body. This body. And I don't just mean for personal projects, for fun. I mean for professional work too. That's how highly I regard this camera body. I feel like I got really lucky, actually. All that frustration led to something useful, a discovery. It's in really good condition too, this particular camera. Very low shutter count. I'm pretty ecstatic about this whole thing. Seems like the story's gonna have a happy ending. So I'm gonna clean the sensor. I should have taken a before photo. Didn't even occur to me. But I started off with some dry cleaning methods. Air, a lot of air. Brushing, very gently brushing with a sensor brush. And although I didn't take a before photo, I did take an after photo. And holy fuck, I can only imagine how bad it looked before, because it's a fucking nightmare. And this is after cleaning it, mind you. So I get right on ordering a wet cleaning kit, because obviously dry is not going to cut it. I did have some concerns though, like, where is it? Like this right here, it's clearly not just dust, there's some kind of a mark there. I didn't know what that was. But upon wet cleaning, I think I discovered what it was, because some dust would smear like this. But with additional wet cleanings, it would go away. And then other dust would behave like this, where at first it would be very resistant to wet cleaning, but then the center would come out, leaving the outline behind, which would go away with additional cleanings. And then with wet cleaning you get streaks sometimes, but then additional wet cleanings will take care of the streaks. So this is the best I could do. This is after 24 wet cleanings, countless dry cleanings in between. And it took me a total of something like 4.5 hours. And I still couldn't get it entirely clean. This is the best I could do. But I think I can live with this. And regarding the hardware, the physical design, I mean the appearance of the camera itself. For me, this is the most beautiful camera design of all time. I just fucking love it. The model that followed this one, they started increasing the size of the screen, tinkering with the layout, and I think it starts to look a little out of proportion. In general, I'm not interested in a large screen on a classic DSLR anyway, but just from a cosmetic point of view, things started looking crowded on the back of the camera. You can't improve upon perfection. This shot that I'm taking here, I did a bit of retouching on, more than I would normally do. That is more than 0. I just thought an uninterrupted shadow looked better, so I got rid of light, stray light around the windows, the ground. But regarding old gear, I think it's important to understand that you can enjoy one thing and that have no bearing on your feeling toward the other thing. In other words, I love shooting old classic cameras, film, digital, but that doesn't mean I don't love shooting modern cameras. I do. I like old shit, VCRs and record players, but you know what else I love? New shit. This camera feels amazing in the hand. Maybe if you have really small hands, it wouldn't.
Nikon?
It's a Canon. It's an old Canon.
And I feel like every camera with a battery grip aspires to feel like this camera, but fails miserably.
These are good
feels great in a horizontal orientation, but feels amazing in a vertical orientation, like the best that I've ever used. Not even close, really. Though I don't do a lot of shooting in vertical orientation outside of portraits, but I'm sure it will be very much appreciated whenever I get around to shooting portraits on this thing, which may be very soon. I just feel more inclined to go shoot when I have this thing in my hands. It just bestows a little bit of its magic upon me. Makes me feel something that I don't normally feel every day. What is that exactly? I'm not sure. Maybe a lack of complacency. Maybe the feeling that I need to work a little harder. There's not so much technology between me and what I'm photographing. I'm not sure, really, because I'm not opposed to any of those things. I'm not opposed to convenience. Certainly not opposed to technology. But this camera puts me in a different frame of mind, and anything that can do that is a valuable asset. Because sometimes I stagnate, and I end up getting stuck in my own little prison cell of recycled ideas. So I look for stuff like this to help break me out of my cell. So at this point, I'm feeling pretty grand about the whole thing. Everything that happened in the past, the other two cameras I had to return, they're a distant memory. My filthy sensor, I didn't even notice, even though the sensor didn't look super clean. When I finished cleaning it, I hadn't really noticed any dust spots. I've been using the JPEGs ever since, and everything's been going great. Going forward, my EF lenses will be paired with this camera, my RF lenses with my Canon mirrorless camera, opening the door to try other brands and other manufacturers in the future. I could get a Sony 35mm and pair that with a Sony camera. I don't need to be stuck to one manufacturer anymore. What the fuck is going on at the bottom of the frame? There's clearly like a discoloration, right? Am I going crazy? Let's assume for a moment there were a problem with your sensor that manifests in only the bottoms of images, and it just so happens you've only been shooting kind of landscapes and in a landscape orientation. How long would it take for you to notice a thing like that? Well, it turns out about a week. Although I only went out and shot like 2 or 3 of those days, some of that week was spent waiting for my wet cleaning supplies for the filthy fucking sensor. There it is again, bottom of the frame. So upon seeing that, when I got home, I did a couple of vertical test shots. And sure enough, over on the right, that's what would be the bottom of the frame in a horizontal orientation. Surely not though, right? Like, how could my luck possibly be that bad? So I went out and did some test shots the following morning. Well, that one looks normal. Well, actually at the top right, you can kind of see a dark smudge. And there it is. My first thought was maybe it's a smear from cleaning. I could order another wet cleaning kit, but the problem is my return window is closing soon. So in order to wait for the wet cleaning kit to arrive, I would really be pushing it. Also, I kind of logicked my way through it. I did some additional tests, and those dark spots, or those dark smears, smudges, lines, whatever, would appear at wide open apertures. I mean, it didn't have to be completely wide open. Like, this was a 2.8 lens, so it was very visible at 2.8 and on, still kind of visible at 5.6. By f8 it was gone. But see, the dust on the sensor reacted in exactly the opposite way, where closed all the way down, f22, that's when the dust was most visible, and it would get less and less visible the more you would open up. Thus I reasoned, couldn't possibly be something on top of the sensor, something cleanable, because that stuff reacts in the opposite way. It must be something with the sensor itself. And yes, of course, I did explore the idea that maybe it was the lens, but that only reinforced the idea that it was the sensor, in that the line was visible in the same place and in the same way with every lens I tried. So I got another fucked up camera. Of course I did. And I have no intention of going through this a fourth time, and a fifth time, and a sixth time. At some point I have to learn my lesson. And that point is now. I am so completely turned off to buying used gear now. Specifically camera bodies. I think I would feel comfortable buying an accessory, maybe even a lens. There's just too much that can go wrong in a camera. Too much that's not immediately noticeable. It'd be too easy if you weren't vigilant in your testing to get stuck with a fucked up camera. And let's just pretend for a moment that I were going to try again a fourth time. And let's pretend I received a camera in good working order. Well, then my success rate would have been 25%. And keep in mind this is a fantasy scenario, because currently my failure rate is 100%. So I say goodbye to this camera. I say goodbye to all my plans and hopes and dreams and appreciation for this camera body, this model, classic DSLRs in general, life itself, Mexican food, all the best stuff. It's all bullshit. But we had our time together. The wife tried to convince me to keep it anyway, because she could see how much joy it was bringing me, but, well, I actually considered it. I slept on it, thought about it overnight. In case you didn't know what slept on it meant. I didn't literally sleep on it, is what I'm telling you. Like, I wasn't on top of the camera sleeping. But I considered the proposition, and could not help but conclude, how unfair is that? Most people plop down their money, they get a camera in full, good working order. I plop down my money, I get a camera with a fairly serious problem. I mean, I still don't know if maybe cleaning it again would resolve the problem. But I'm already out $30 from that first cleaning kit, might be out another $30. Plus the closing return window is a concern. This is my third visit to the same FedEx office.